get on with tonight's show, I want to take a moment to say this. On behalf of me, Angela, and everyone here at the Dark Dialogue Podcast Network, happy holidays to every single one of you. However you're spending this season, whether that's surrounded by family, chosen family, friends, or just getting through it one day at a time, we're genuinely grateful that you choose to spend some of that time here with us. These stories matter because you listen, because you care, and because you keep these conversations alive. As we close out this year, I also want to invite you to join us for something special. On New Year's night, we're going live with a Dark Dialogue live show. It's a chance to hang out together in real time. We talk about the cases, the stories, the strange and the serious, and look ahead at what's coming next for the network in the year ahead. No edits, no polish, just real conversation live. If you want to join us, you can find all of the details and the live stream link right now at darkdialogue.com/live. You can set a reminder, bookmark it, and jump in with us when we go live. So wherever you're listening from, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting independent storytelling. And we hope you'll ring in the new year with us live. From all of us here at Dark Dialogue, happy holidays, take care of each other, and keep the dialogue alive. Quiet Florida night. An Oldsmar townhouse complex settling into sleep. The soft hum of a refrigerator on the other side of a thin interior wall. A faint tick of an aging ceiling fan. Then, a heavy, muffled thud. And silence so complete, it feels like the world holds its breath. There are crime scenes that whisper, and then there are crime scenes that feel like they never stop screaming. When first responders stepped into Karen Pannell's townhouse on that October morning in 2003, they walked into a room frozen in that scream. Karen lay on the floor near the kitchen, lifeless, brutally attacked, and just above her, smeared on the wall in dark, drying arcs of blood, were 3 letters. Letters written in shaky, uneven strokes by a finger dragged through chaos. A message, a name, a final moment captured in the quiet of a dying home. Rock. R-O-C. Whoever wrote it was trying to say something desperate, urgent, unmistakable, the kind of message investigators dream of and dread in the same breath. Because dying declarations, real or staged, can steer an entire case before anyone realizes how far they've been led. But before she became a crime scene, Karen Pannell was a woman living a life she had built carefully. She was 39, a former model who transitioned into a career in the airline industry. She had friends, a steady job, plans she was finally beginning to prioritize. And lately, she'd been trying to step away from a relationship that no longer felt safe. Karen lived alone. She kept her home neat, orderly, comfortable. She was the type of person who checked on friends, followed up on messages, and made sure people got home okay. The type of person everyone described the same way. Warm, grounded, impossible not to like. And yet, in her final hours of life, something terrible found its way through her locked front door. As investigators surveyed the scene, questions piled up faster than answers. How had the attacker gotten inside without a trace? Why had the violence been so sudden and so overwhelming? And that message on the wall, those 3 letters, was it a clue, a warning, a trap? Because staged crime scenes, they tend to reveal more than they hide. They tell 2 stories at once, the story of the victim's last moments and the story the killer wants the world to believe. And buried somewhere between those 2 is the truth. Tonight, we start with the moment Karen's life was taken, and the moment her voice smeared in blood began to speak for her. Only question is, was it really her voice at all? Hey, Angela, how's it going tonight?
It's going. It's one of those nights where the case has been sitting with me all day, you know?
Yep.
Not in a loud way, but quietly in the background. The kind of case that doesn't demand attention, but won't let go once you notice it.
Yeah, this one does that. I've been carrying it around for a long time too. Matter of fact, saw it the first time on Forensic Files, the original one, years ago. And it's not because there's a mountain of information, but because there isn't. The absence is what is heavy.
Exactly. Some cases overwhelm you with detail, and this one does the opposite. It's defined by what isn't there, the silence, the gaps, the ordinary setting where something very much not ordinary happened.
And those are often the hardest stories to tell responsibly because there's a temptation to fill the quiet with speculation. And we're not going to do that tonight.
Nope. We're going to let the quiet speak for itself.
So welcome back, listeners, to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we unravel the shadows of the human mind and dive deep into the mysteries that haunt small towns and big cities alike. I'm your host, John.
And I'm Angela. And together we shine a light on the stories that keep us up at night, unsolved disappearances, lives stolen too soon, and the questions that refuse to be buried.
Tonight's case is one that doesn't come with spectacle. There's no dramatic opening scene, no obvious villain stepping out of the shadows, no clear moment where everything goes wrong. Instead, there's a woman, a normal day, and then nothing.
And that nothing is where so many families are left to live. That's the part people don't always understand. When there's no crime scene, no confirmed timeline, no definitive answers, the disappearance doesn't freeze in time. It stretches. It follows the people who loved them into every year that comes after that.
Karen Pannell is one of those names that never became a headline outside of her region. No national media frenzy, no viral documentary, just a family, a community, and a question that never was resolved.
And yet, when you look closely, her murder carries many of the same themes we see again and again. Routine, trust, and familiarity. In a moment when something quietly breaks away from the unexpected path.
That's why this case matters, not because it's sensational, but because it's representative. It reminds us how vulnerable normal life actually is.
It also forces us to confront how investigations unfold or fail to. When there's no immediate evidence to react to, when a disappearance doesn't announce itself as a crime, when time becomes the enemy before anyone realizes they're racing it.
We're going to approach this case carefully, methodically, respectfully. We'll walk through the setting, Karen's life, the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, and what followed without rushing ahead of the facts.
And just as importantly, we're going to talk about what wasn't done. The moments where silence settled in, the institutional limitations, the unanswered questions that still deserve attention.
This isn't a story about assigning blame prematurely. It's about understanding how a woman can be murdered and how the system meant to protect people sometimes struggle when there's no obvious crime to chase.
It's also about memory, because as long as Karen's name is spoken, as long as her story is told with care, she hasn't disappeared completely.
And that's why we're here. That's why we tell these stories the way that we do.
So tonight we start at the beginning, not with what happened, but with where. With place, with context, with the environment that shaped the quiet rhythms of Karen Pannell's life.
So let's talk about where this story unfolds. Angela, tell us about Oldsmar, Florida.
Oldsmar, Florida sits quietly at the northern edge of Tampa Bay, where the water narrows and feels more contained, less open gulf, more inland tide. It's a small waterfront city in Northeast Pinellas County, positioned between Tampa and Clearwater, close enough to the region's larger cities to benefit from their growth, but far enough away to maintain its own rhythm. Oldsmar was not a town that formed organically over generations. It was designed. Its origins trace back to the early 1910s when automobile magnate Ransom Eli Olds, I love that name.
It's a pretty cool one,
of Oldsmobile and later REO Motor Car Company fame, purchased more than 30,000 acres along the northern shore of Tampa Bay. His vision extended beyond land ownership. Olds imagined a planned community built on order, productivity, and modern infrastructure. Roads were laid deliberately. A bank, railroad depot, sawmill, and docks were constructed early, anchoring the settlement with the tools of commerce and transport before a population had fully arrived. Originally known as Riald's Farm, the development blended agricultural ambition with residential planning. Model farms were paired with town lots, and the area was marketed heavily to Northerners looking for winter homes or investment opportunities. As the focus shifted away from the agriculture and toward a full town site, the name evolved into Oldsmar, a combination of Olds and Tampa. Really? Who saw that?
I don't know.
Anyway, I'm struggling with that. Signaling the transition from farmland to coastal community. Even in its earliest years, Oldsmar reflected tension between intention and reality. After Olds reduced his direct involvement, land promoters took over marketing efforts, sometimes relying on spectacle rather than substance. Sales events included gimmicks like staged gold rushes, where prospective buyers were invited to dig for buried prizes on vacant land. During Florida's speculative land boom in the 1920s, excess and misrepresentation took their toll. Controversy surrounding underwater lots and misleading sale practices eventually led the town to briefly rebrand itself as Tampa Shores in the late 1920s, an effort to distance the community from growing distrust. By 1937, I had to look at that again and make sure it was 19.
Yep.
By 1937, the town reverted to the name Oldsmar. The damage, however, had already shaped its trajectory. For decades after, Oldsmar remained small and semi-rural. There's that word. Cattle grazing. You're leaving this in, right? Because people laugh at me. Cattle grazing, hog farms, and truck farming were common. The town existed on the margins of Florida's larger coastal development, insulated in part by geography and in part by choice. It wasn't until post-war highway expansion and the growth of the Tampa Bay metropolitan area that Oldsmar began to change more noticeably. Population figures reflect that gradual shift. Did John write me some census records?
I sure did.
Nice. In 1970, Oldsmar had roughly 1,500 residents. By 1980, the number had grown to around 2,600. The most specific growth came in the following decades. Over 8,300 residents by 1990, approximately 12,200 by 2000, and nearly 14,900 by the 2020 census. Recent estimates place the population in the mid-1,400 range.
1,000.
No! I'd just like you to correct me. I missed a zero. Thank you. Recent estimates place the population in the mid-14,000 range. Showing modest. How do you put up with me?
Now you got to read that without that big emphasis.
I know. How do you put up with me? Recent estimates place the population in the mid-14,000 range, showing modest fluctuations rather than rapid expansion. Today, Oldsmar occupies a demographic middle ground. It is neither a rural town nor a large city. It functions as a suburban community tied closely to the broader Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater economy, while still maintaining a distinct local identity. That identity is reinforced through public spaces and community planning. Parks, walking trails, and waterfront access feature prominently in how Oldsmar presents itself. R.E. Olds Park, named after the city's founder, I don't know why that struck me funny, serves as a focal point for public gatherings and events, reinforcing a sense of continuity between the town's past and present. From a public safety perspective, Oldsmar is generally regarded as stable, something I'm not. Crime data places the city slightly below national averages overall, with violent crime rates remaining relatively low year to year. Property crime, particularly theft and vehicle-related offenses, accounts for most reported incidents. On paper, Oldsmar reads as predictable and manageable. Perception plays a powerful role in places like this. Oldsmar is a city shaped by routine. Commutes to nearby cities, evenings near the water, familiar streets, and repeated patterns. It's the kind of environment where people assume irregularities will stand out quickly, where someone going missing would immediately register as wrong. The city has also produced an unusually high number of professional athletes and figures for its size, particularly in baseball, basketball, and football. While those names bring a sense of pride, they exist alongside the far more common experience of daily unremarkable life, the kind defined by schedules, neighbors, and consistency. Oldsmar sits within Pinellas County, a peninsula county bordered by Tampa Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. Is it still the Gulf of Mexico?
No, it's the Gulf of America.
Yeah, it's the Gulf of America now.
100%.
Pinellas is one of Florida's most densely populated counties, known for tourism, beaches, and long-established coastal cities like St. Petersburg and Clearwater. Oldsmar differs from those communities. It is more inland, more controlled, and less shaped by transient tourism. That distinction matters. Oldsmar is not a place people associate with instability. It is designed to feel orderly, safe, predictable. And in communities like this, disruption doesn't arrive with noise or warning. It often reveals itself slowly, through absence rather than action. Understanding Oldsmar means understanding the contrast. The city built intentionally, a population shaped by steady growth rather than upheaval, a place where routines carry weight and where silence, when it appears, can linger far longer than expected.
Thank you, Angela.
You're so welcome, I guess.
So, Karen Pannell was born in Germany, the daughter of a United States Air Force serviceman, into a life shaped early by movement, structure, and adaptability. Like any Army brats, any military kids. Military families learn quickly how to make a sense of home wherever they happen to land, and Karen grew up doing just that. Adjusting to new places, new routines, and new faces with an ease that would later become one of her defining traits. Eventually, the family settled primarily in Florida. Karen was one of 6 children and the only girl among 5 brothers. That position shaped her in quiet but lasting ways. She learned how to speak up without forcing attention, how to move comfortably in male-dominated spaces, how to be warm without being fragile. Her brother Michael would later describe her as someone who could strike up a conversation with anyone, the kind of person who made strangers feel like acquaintances within minutes. Family members consistently described Karen as upbeat, social, and emotionally open. When relatives spoke with her in the period leading up to her death, there was no warning signs, no expressions of fear or unease about her life. She sounded busy, engaged, content. Whatever stress existed in her world, it wasn't something she carried outwardly. Karen grew into adulthood with the same ease of connection. She built a career rather than drifting into one. By the early 1990s, she was working for American Airlines at Tampa International Airport, a job that she would hold for roughly 12 years. In the airline world, longevity matters. It speaks to reliability, interpersonal skills, and an ability to manage constant change, and Karen did all of that well. She worked in customer service, a role that demands patience, composure, and an emotional intelligence that can't be trained into someone who doesn't already have it. Coworkers remembered her as a popular and dependable person, someone you wanted beside you during a busy shift. Someone who could calm an angry passenger without escalating the situation. Someone who fit naturally into that social ecosystem of airline life. That life extended beyond the terminal. Karen's social circle was built partly around colleagues and partly around the broader Tampa Bay community. Airline work creates its own rhythm, irregular hours, shared stress, shared downtime, and Karen leaned into it. She traveled. She went out, she made friends easily, but she also valued her independence. She loved Florida not just as a place to live, but as a lifestyle. Friends remembered her passion for the water, beach days, boating, diving, and spontaneous trips out into Tampa Bay. She loved being on the water, loved the physical freedom of it, the sun, the salt, the sense of movement. Some of her friends' most vivid memories of Karen were simple ones. Days spent hopping between small islands, returning at sunset, sunburned and tired in the best possible way. By the early 2000s, Karen had established herself firmly in Oldsmar. She lived alone in a villa or townhome in a quiet residential neighborhood, an area neighbors understood as safe and uneventful. This wasn't a place defined by transience or instability. It was the kind of neighborhood people settled into once they felt rooted. Shortly before her death, Karen had purchased a new black Volkswagen. It's a small detail, but one that matters. Buying a new car is rarely an impulsive act. It suggests stability, planning, confidence in the future. Family members described her as busy during this time, working, socializing, moving forward. There was no sense that her life was contracting or unraveling. It was expanding. Those who knew her consistently returned to the same descriptions: friendly, approachable, kind. Her brother said that anyone meeting Karen would be greeted with a big smile, a warm hello, and likely a genuine conversation. Not small talk, real engagement. She wasn't guarded. She didn't move through the world suspiciously. She trusted people easily because for most of her life, trust had been rewarded. Karen's independence didn't mean isolation. It meant choice. She liked her space. She liked her routines. She liked knowing that she could come and go on her own terms. That independence extended into her romantic life as well. Karen had experienced serious relationships before. One former boyfriend, Rock Herpich, was significant enough in her personal history that his name remained emotionally relevant long after the relationship ended. Details about their time together are limited in public records, but what is clear is that Rock represented an earlier chapter in Karen's life, one that carried weight, familiarity, and emotional imprint. Their relationship had ended before the events of 2003. Whatever it had been, it was over, and Karen had moved on. And I was able to find that, I think Rock was kind of an asshole, and he didn't treat her very good. There was some insinuation that he was abusive. I will say that the dude looks creepily like Tom Berenger. Like, creepily like Tom Berenger. Yeah. If you see anything, at least at the time that Forensic Files was recorded, which would have been a long time ago, but if you, it is eerie. So anyway, by 2003, Karen was involved in an on-again, off-again relationship with Timothy, known as Tim Permenter. At first, the relationship followed a familiar pattern: attraction, connection, intensity. But over time, Karen began to learn more about Tim's past, details that unsettled her and changed how she viewed the relationship. Tim had a turbulent history, marked by manipulation and criminal behavior, including involvement in pimping. These were not things that Karen knew at the outset. When she did learn them, her perspective shifted. Friends and later court testimony would describe her growing discomfort, not just with his past, but with his behavior, controlling tendencies, pressure, a dynamic that no longer felt safe or balanced. Karen did not accept that dynamic quietly. She attempted to end the relationship. That decision, choosing distance, choosing autonomy, was consistent with who Karen had always been. She valued her independence. She valued her peace. And when a relationship no longer aligned with those values, she tried to step away. That is where her victim backstory ends, not with fear, but not with retreat, but with a woman asserting control over her own life, having already lived decades as someone who built community, career, and independence on her own terms. Karen Pannell's body was discovered on the morning of Saturday, October 11, 2003, inside her villa at 2030 Montego Court in Oldsmar, Florida. She was found lying face up on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood. The person who discovered her was her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Tim Permenter. According to statements later given to law enforcement, Tim said that he came to Karen's home that morning, entered the residence, and found her unresponsive on the kitchen floor covered in blood. He then called 911 to report that she was dead. Deputies later noted that in the days following the discovery, early local reporting referred to Tim as Karen's current boyfriend and identified him as the person who had found her body that Saturday morning. During the 911 call, which would later be played in court proceedings and documentaries, Tim sounded distraught and emotional. He told the dispatcher variations of "Karen is dead," presenting himself as a shocked partner who just stumbled upon a homicide scene. When deputies arrived at the villa, Tim's behavior reinforced that initial impression. Reports indicate that he appeared extremely upset and vomited in the front yard after law enforcement arrived. A reaction that at the time was interpreted as shock and trauma rather than with any kind of suspicion. In addition to calling 911, Tim also contacted Catherine Mallet, a co-worker and a friend of Karen's. During that call, he told her that Karen had been, quote, shot or stabbed. A level of detail that would later be scrutinized by prosecutors who argued that he should not have been able to determine the nature of her injuries from the limited vantage point that he claimed when he first saw her.
Dun, dun, dun.
Inside the villa, deputies from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office found Karen lying on her back on the kitchen floor, with extensive blood around her upper body and multiple visible stab wounds. She was clearly deceased by the time first responders arrived. Near her body, on a wall in the kitchen area, deputies observed 3 letters written in blood, R-O-C. At the time, the writing appeared to resemble a dying declaration and immediately drew investigative attention toward a person with that name. Also present in the home were a pizza box with several slices missing and beer containers, details that were documented during the initial walkthrough and would later become relevant in reconstructing the final hours before Karen's death. The rest of the home appeared largely intact. There was no obvious signs of forced entry, no indication that the residence had been ransacked, observations that led investigators to believe early on that the attack was personal rather than the result of a burglary or a random intrusion. After confirming Karen's death, deputies secured the villa as a homicide scene, requested crime scene technicians, and began canvassing the Montego Court neighborhood for witnesses and reports of any suspicious activity. Within days, the sheriff's office informed nearby residents that there was, quote, nothing to worry about, signaling that investigators believed the killing was targeted and did not pose an ongoing threat to the surrounding community. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery, the narrative took shape quickly. Tim Perminer was viewed as the grieving partner who had walked into a nightmare. The word rock on the wall appeared to point investigators towards her former boyfriend. And with those two elements, the discoverer and the bloody name, the initial direction of the investigation was set long before the forensic evidence would begin to challenge it. After confirming Karen Pannell's death, crime scene technicians photographed the position of her body, the surrounding blood patterns, and the word rock written in blood on the kitchen wall. The writing was treated as a critical piece of potential evidence and preserved for later analysis. Investigators conducted a detailed processing of the scene. Items believed to be connected to the final hours of Karen's life were collected, including the pizza box with the slices missing, the pizza receipt, the beer containers, and other objects found in the residence. Fingerprints were lifted from surfaces throughout the home, including the pizza box, and biological samples were collected for DNA testing. Investigators obtained Karen's cell phone records and collected messages from her phone to reconstruct her recent communications. Detectives reviewed her calls and texts in an effort to understand her movements, recent interactions, and any conflicts or tensions in the days leading up to her death. So, while detectives were looking into the possible connection of rock, they also were interviewing Tim Perminer, who presented himself as the grieving boyfriend who had discovered Karen's body, and he cooperated with investigators. He allowed searches and provided a timeline of his movements. He claimed that he had left Karen's home around 7:30 on Friday night, well before the estimated time of the killing. As part of the timeline reconstruction, detectives located and interviewed the Pizza Hut delivery driver who had delivered food to Karen's home that evening. The driver placed Karen alive and Tim present at the residence around 8:48 to 9 p.m., directly contradicting Tim's account that he had already left the home. Meanwhile, forensic examination of Karen's body recovered skin cells from beneath her fingernails and other biological material. Subsequent testing identified Tim Perminer's DNA mixed with Karen's blood at the scene, evidence that would later become central to the investigation. At this early stage, detectives were working along two parallel tracks. one shaped by the apparent message on the wall pointing towards Rock, and another shaped by the emerging timeline inconsistencies and forensic findings connected to the man who had reported discovering Karen's body. Once investigators documented the crime scene and the word Rock written in blood on the kitchen wall, attention shifted quickly to a man whose name appeared to have been left behind by the victim herself, Rock Herpich, who was Karen's former boyfriend. Detectives learned that Karen and Rock had begun dating shortly after her divorce. Rock worked as an insurance adjuster and was known as a Harley-Davidson rider. The relationship escalated quickly, and the two eventually lived together for about a year. From the start, the relationship was described as volatile. Friends, acquaintances, and Rock himself later characterized it as mutually toxic. Arguments were loud and frequent. Police were called to domestic disturbances on more than one occasion, though no arrests were ever made. Karen filed at least one domestic battery complaint against Rock, and Rock admitted that during one argument he kicked in her door. Even after the relationship ended, tension remained. The breakup had occurred roughly a year before Karen's murder, but the two were still locked in a lingering dispute over a $900 roll-top desk. Rock wanted the desk returned. Karen refused to give it up. Investigators would later view this unresolved conflict as evidence that resentment between them had not completely cooled. By October 2003, however, Rock's life had moved on. He was living with his new girlfriend. On the night Karen was killed, he was at home while his girlfriend's young son hosted a backyard sleepover with several friends, a detail that would soon become important. Still, when deputies first saw Rock written in blood, the implication felt immediate and unavoidable. Investigators initially treated the writing as possibly a dying declaration. The name matched a former boyfriend with a documented history of domestic conflict. From an investigative standpoint, it appeared to be a rare and direct accusation. Even Tim Perminer reinforced this early framing. During interviews, he told detectives that Karen had a, quote, rocky relationship with an ex-boyfriend named Rock, pointing investigators further in that direction. In the earliest phases of the case, detectives essentially treated Rock as their primary suspect. Internally, the narrative appeared straightforward: a volatile ex-boyfriend, a history of domestic violence, unresolved disputes, and a name written in blood above the victim's body. Rock understood the gravity immediately. When he became aware of the murder and saw press coverage describing the crime scene, he later said his first thought was that no one would ever believe that he hadn't done it, because his name was literally written in Karen's blood. Detectives pulled records documenting Rock and Karen's history together. They reviewed prior domestic violence complaints, police responses to loud arguments, and reports describing physical confrontations that included objects being thrown during fights. They also noted Rock's past drug issues and minor legal troubles, factors that added to his perceived risk profile. Investigators then went directly to Rock. They informed him that Karen had been murdered and confronted him with the fact that Rock had been written on the wall near her body. Rock did not deny the volatility of their relationship. He acknowledged the screaming matches, the police visits, and the fact that they had been bad for each other. Rather than minimizing the past, he openly described it as toxic. At the same time, detectives treated him not just as a person of interest, but as someone who could plausibly be the killer. Rock was subjected to physical examinations. The bottoms of his feet were photographed. His fingernails were clipped. Investigators were preparing to compare any trace evidence from his body against material recovered from the crime scene. They also moved quickly to verify his alibi. Detectives confirmed that on the night of the murder, Rock was at home with his current girlfriend. The presence of her son and several other children attending the sleepover provided multiple independent witnesses, placing Rock at that location during the critical time frame. As forensic results began coming in, the picture shifted. There was no physical evidence tying Rock to the stabbing. Blood pattern analysis began raising questions about the timing and the authorship of the writing on the wall. Investigators learned that Karen was exclusively left-handed, while the letters appeared consistent with a right-handed stroke. The blood used to write rock had been applied over dried spatter, suggesting it was written sometime after the main assault. Piece by piece, the assumption that the message was a genuine dying declaration eroded. With a corroborated alibi, no forensic link to the scene, and growing evidence that the writing itself was staged, detectives ultimately cleared Rock Herpage as a suspect. What initially looked like a case solving itself, a violent ex named in blood, began to look like something else entirely, a frame job. As the investigation continued, forensic results began arriving that fundamentally altered how detectives understood the scene inside Karen Pannell's kitchen. Examiners recovered skin cells from beneath Karen's fingernails, along with other biological material collected during the autopsy and scene processing. Laboratory testing later identified Tim's DNA mixed with Karen's blood at the scene, physical evidence that placed him in close contact with her during the violent encounter. At the same time, blood spatter and pattern analysis focused on the writing on the wall. Examiners determined that the word rock had been written over older, already dried blood spatter. This finding was critical. It meant the writing was not created during the assault itself, but after the main attack had already occurred, the significant bleeding had taken place, and enough time had passed for blood to dry on the wall. That conclusion directly undermined the idea that the word was a dying declaration written in Karen's final moments. Further analysis raised additional problems with the theory. Investigators noted that Karen was left-handed. While the letters on the wall were consistent with a right-handed stroke, the height of the writing also drew scrutiny. Given the nature of her injuries, including evidence suggesting that she was likely paralyzed by the first stab, examiners found it improbable that Karen could have stood, reached the wall at that height, and deliberately written the letters herself. Taken together, these findings forced a reassessment. The message that initially appeared to point outward, toward a former boyfriend, now looked increasingly like something added after the fact. And with the forensic evidence beginning to connect Tim Perminer directly to the violence, the investigation's center of gravity shifted away from the name on the wall and back towards the man who had reported discovering Karen's body. Cell tower evidence became one of the most significant technical challenges to Tim Perminer's alibi. From the beginning, Tim told investigators that he had left Karen Pannell's home early on the night of the murder. He claimed that he departed around 7:30 and was already driving north on US 19 when he placed a call to his roommate, George Solomon, at 9:32. According to Tim, that call proved that he was well away from Oldsmar by the time Karen was killed. He repeated that version of events under oath. On the stand, Tim testified that he had only, quote, popped in briefly at Karen's home, left while she was still alive, and made the 9:32 p.m. phone call as he headed toward Newport Richey, not from anywhere near her neighborhood. Investigators tested that claim. Prosecutor Brian Nalvin subpoenaed Tim's T-Mobile phone records, obtaining not just the call logs, but the associated cell tower routing data for more than a dozen calls made around the time of the homicide. Those records were analyzed by a T-Mobile network engineer, identified in court testimony as Sean Sparks. Sparks testified that the 9:32 p.m. call did not route through a cell tower along US Route 19 miles away, as Tim claimed. Instead, the call connected through a tower located very close to Karen's home. According to the engineer, the call was likely made from near Pannell's house and bounced off a tower estimated to be between 1/3 of a mile and 1 mile from her residence. That placement directly contradicted Tim's account of being on the highway heading north. It placed him in the Oldsmar area at the time when he claimed that he had already left. The tower data also aligned with other evidence investigators were already weighing. The Pizza Hut delivery driver independently placed him inside Karen's home around 8:48 to 9 p.m., speaking with Karen at the door while Tim stood nearby. That observation conflicted with Tim's assertion that he had left by 7:30. In addition, 3 neighbors later testified that they saw Tim's BMW parked outside Karen's home at multiple points during the night around 10 p.m., 2 a.m., and 5 a.m. Those sightings suggested repeated presence rather than an early departure. Together, the cell tower evidence allowed investigators and prosecutors to reconstruct a completely different sequence of events: an argument and killing sometime after the pizza delivery, followed by staging inside the home, and a phone call while Tim was still in the area, not from a distant highway. The phone records did not stand alone, they just fit. As investigators continued dismantling Tim Perminer's alibi, their attention turned to George Solomon, a man Tim had attempted to use as both an alibi witness and ultimately a confidant. George Solomon was Tim's friend and former co-worker. The two had worked together at a car dealership on Gulf to Bay Boulevard, and during a period when George was separated from his girlfriend, he had lived with Tim as a roommate near the dealership. By October 2003, George was no longer living with Tim. He had reconciled with his girlfriend, Vicky Speakman, and was staying with her and their daughters in Newport Richey. Even so, George and Tim remained in regular contact and continued socializing. From the beginning, Tim attempted to place George into his timeline as an alibi. Tim told investigators that after leaving Karen's home early on Friday evening, he went back to his apartment and later drove to Newport Richey to have drinks with George and Vicky. In that version of events, Tim claimed the visit was planned, that he had been invited, and that he spent the night with them, effectively positioning George as a witness who could place him away from Oldsmar during the time that Karen was killed. George's account didn't quite match that story. George testified that around 10:30 p.m. on the night of the murder, he received a call from Tim. Tim was the one who initiated the contact. According to George, Tim said that he needed to come up to Newport Richey because, quote, he needed to talk in person about something. They agreed to meet at a gas station near Newport Richey. That detail mattered. It showed the meeting was not a casual continuation of an evening out, but something Tim urgently sought after the killing. When George arrived at the gas station, he immediately noticed Tim's condition. He described Tim as, quote, shaky, very shaky, visibly agitated and upset in a way that went beyond someone dealing with an argument or a breakup. During that gas station meeting, George testified that Tim told him there had been an incident with Karen. He then asked George to, quote, cover for him, to say that Tim had been with George earlier and for longer than he actually had. Detectives and prosecutors later interpreted this as a direct request for an alibi. After the gas station conversation, George invited Tim back to the house where he, Vicky, and the children were staying. George said part of the reason was concern. Tim was clearly unsettled, and George wanted to understand what the hell was going on. Later that night, while drinking, George testified that Tim abruptly confessed. According to George, Tim blurted out that Karen was dead, telling him words to the effect of, quote, she's gone, I killed her, I killed Karen. Tim went on to explain that the killing followed an argument and said it happened after he had quit his job. George's account placed Tim not only seeking an alibi after the fact, but admitting responsibility for Karen's death during what he described as an unguarded moment. For investigators, George Solomon was no longer just an acquaintance mentioned in Tim's timeline. He became a central witness, one Tim himself had brought into this case. As detectives began focusing more closely on Tim Perminer, they uncovered a background that sharply contrasted with the person that he had presented to Karen Pannell. When Tim entered Karen's life, he portrayed himself as a successful, intelligent professional, someone who appeared stable, articulate, and forward-moving. Friends and family later said Karen believed that he worked in a conventional, respectable field and saw him as smooth, capable, and engaging. The investigation revealed something very different. A routine criminal history check showed that Tim was not simply a man with minor run-ins with the law. He was a longtime felon with a history of violence, exploitation, and manipulation. Detectives learned that in his late teens and early 20s, Tim had operated a small chain of escort and prostitution businesses in Gainesville and Tallahassee, using names such as Esquire Escorts. In prior interviews from that period, Tim himself claimed that the operation grossed $6,000 to $7,000 a day by the time that he was 20 years old. In 1990, Tim was involved in a gunfight at the Capitol Ridge Apartments in Tallahassee with a rival pimp connected to an escort service called Exclusively Yours. Accounts described Tim as the aggressor. The other man was shot twice. The incident became central to his criminal record. Tim's name later appeared in media connected to broader scandals. Reporting tied Esquire Escorts to allegations that a University of Florida booster had paid for prostitutes from Tim's operation to have sex with basketball player Dwayne Shinzius. The same escort service surfaced during the downfall of UFC president Steve Altman, who claimed that he had used the service only for massages. Beyond the escort business, detectives confirmed that Tim had served approximately 12 years in Florida State Prison for attempted murder, a conviction tied to the Tallahassee shooting. By the time Karen was killed, Tim was on probation. Later documentation and commentary described him as, quote, a 16-time felon, with convictions and charges spanning fraud, violence, and related offenses, a far cry from the professional image that he had projected.
Was it actually 16?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go through everything, but he's a total piece of shit. So investigators also learned how Karen herself became aware of his past. During an earlier domestic-type 911 call involving Tim, a patrol deputy responded to Karen's home. While on scene, the deputy ran Tim's information and saw that he was on probation for attempted murder. Recognizing the seriousness of what he had uncovered, the deputy made the decision to inform Karen directly. He told her that Tim's criminal history and probation status were public record and warned her about who she was involved with. For Karen, this information was a turning point. Friends later said that when she began dating Tim, she knew none of this. She believed that he was working in a legitimate field and saw him as charming and intelligent. The revelation that he had been a pimp and a violent felon came months into their relationship, not at the beginning. Karen confided that she was disturbed by what she had learned and that this was not the life or the history that she had signed up for. According to later reporting and case summaries, her discovery of Tim's past was one of the primary reasons that she decided the relationship had to end. Despite the decision, Tim continued trying to stay close. He presented himself carefully to Karen's family. He attempted to maintain access, but investigators would later frame the situation as one in which Karen had seen behind the mask and was actively trying to disengage. In the investigative narrative that followed, Tim's background became critical to understanding motive. Detectives and prosecutors described a pattern: a former pimp, accustomed to control, a man who had already resorted to gun violence, and a felon facing a girlfriend who now knew the truth and wanted out. George Solomon's testimony that Tim said the killing followed an argument after he had quit his job and that Karen wanted to end the relationship fit squarely into that framework. For investigators, Tim's hidden past and Karen's belated discovery of it formed the emotional fuse. Once she knew who he really was and moved to leave, a man with a documented history of violence and exploitation reacted in the way that he had before, with force, and this time it was fatal. Advocates and researchers use the phrase exit ramp danger zone to describe a critical reality in domestic violence cases. The moment a woman plans to leave, actively leaves, or has just left an abusive partner is statistically the most dangerous phase of the relationship. This is not theoretical, it's measurable. Multiple studies and advocacy organizations consistently report that 70 to 77% of intimate partner homicides occur during separation or an attempted separation. Violence does not decline once a victim leaves. It often increases, with some reviews showing a roughly 75% spike in serious violence that can last for a year or more after separation, and in many cases up to 2 years. The reason is control. Abusive relationships are not sustained by affection or conflict alone. They are sustained by control. When a victim begins to leave, that control erodes. For an abuser, the loss of control is frequently the trigger that turns coercive or emotional abuse into physical abuse, or escalates existing physical abuse into lethal force. Researchers and advocates see the same pattern repeatedly during this phase. In the pre-departure stage, victims often plan quietly. They gather money, secure documents, arrange transportation, identify safe housing. This secrecy is not deception, it's survival. Economic dependence and isolation are two of the largest barriers to leaving safely. As the abuser senses withdrawal, fewer calls, emotional distance, hidden belongings, legal consultations, behavior often escalates. Monitoring increases, phones are checked, digital surveillance intensifies, interrogations become constant, threats turn explicit. Statements like, "If you ever leave me, I'll kill you," are not rare during this phase. The immediate separation window, the hours, days, and weeks just before or after leaving, is the most lethal point. This is when researchers see sharp increases in strangulation, use of weapons, forced entry, and ambushes at predictable locations such as the victim's home, workplace, or during child exchanges. Even after physical separation, danger does not automatically end. Many abusers shift to post-separation coercive control, using courts, custody disputes, finances, and repeated legal filings to maintain power. Advocates describe this as abuse by proxy, where institutions are used as tools to continue harassment, surveillance, and punishment. Because of these patterns, recent or impending separation is treated as a standalone lethality risk factor in many domestic violence risk assessments. It sits alongside other high-risk indicators such as prior strangulation, threats to kill, access to weapons, and obsessive jealousy. Hotlines and advocacy organizations consistently emphasize that the first 12 to 18 months after leaving remain especially dangerous. Many of the most serious injuries and homicides occur in that window, not during the relationship's early volatility, but during its attempted end. This is why advocates push back so strongly against the phrase, "just leave." Leaving is not a single act. It is a process, and it's one that requires planning, support, and timing. Survivors are urged to create structured safety plans that may include confidential shelter options, legal protections, financial preparation, and controlled methods of departure. National and local hotlines frame separation as a medical-level risk event, not a spontaneous decision point. In short, the exit ramp is not freedom. It is the most dangerous stretch of the road. By the time investigators finished pulling apart the evidence, one thing was clear long before a courtroom ever heard the case. This wasn't a mystery born out of randomness. It wasn't a stranger in the night. It wasn't chaos without context. Karen Pannell was doing something millions of women try to do every year. She was stepping away from a relationship that no longer felt safe. She was reclaiming space, reclaiming agency, reclaiming her life. And in domestic violence cases, that moment, the moment control slips, is often the most dangerous one of all. The word written on her wall tried to tell a different story, pointed outward. It suggested an old conflict, an old rage, an old villain. For a time, it worked. It redirected attention, it bought time, it nearly rewrote the narrative of her death. But evidence doesn't care about performance. Forensics don't respond to emotion. Cell towers don't bend to alibis, and people who are asked to lie often end up telling the truth instead. What investigators uncovered was not just who was responsible, but why the story was staged the way it was, why blame was redirected, why control had to be reasserted even after Karen was gone. This episode ends where many victim stories do, at the edge of separation, at the point where warning signs are clearest and danger is highest. Next time, we step into the courtroom. We examine how the state dismantled the lie piece by piece, how the evidence was presented, and how a man who tried to rewrite Karen's final moments was ultimately confronted with the truth that he couldn't escape. Because Karen Pannell's voice was not written on a wall. It was carried forward by evidence, by testimony, and by the refusal to let her story be rewritten. And that's where we'll continue. Before we step any further into evidence, testimony, verdicts, we need to pause and return to the person at the center of this story. Karen Pannell was not a case file. She was not a crime scene. She was not a cautionary headline. She was a woman who built a life. Karen grew up in a military family, learning early how to adapt, how to connect, and how to make herself at home wherever she landed. That ease with people stayed with her. Friends and family remembered her as warm, outgoing, and genuinely kind. Someone who could strike up a conversation with anyone and make it feel natural, not forced. She worked hard. She built a career in airline customer service, a job that demands patience, empathy, and resilience. For more than a decade, she showed up every day in her role where people are often stressed, frustrated, or angry, and she met them with professionalism and humanity. Coworkers described her as reliable, well-liked, and easy to work alongside. Outside of work, Karen loved the life that she had chosen. She loved Florida. She loved the water. She loved being outdoors, boating, diving, spending time with friends under open skies. Those who knew her talk about beach days, small island trips, sunsets over Tampa Bay. Moments that weren't flashy or dramatic, but deeply lived. Karen understood joy in its simplest forms: movement, laughter, connection, and freedom. She valued her independence. By the time she settled in Oldsmar, Karen had created a life that reflected that value. She lived on her own. She made her own decisions. She wasn't searching for someone to complete her. She was choosing how and with whom she shared her time. And that matters because too often, when women are killed by intimate partners, their stories are reduced to the relationship that ended them, as if their identity begins and ends with who hurt them. Karen was more than that. She was a sister, a daughter, a friend, a co-worker that people trusted, a woman who laughed easily and welcomed others openly. In the months before her death, Karen was doing something profoundly ordinary and profoundly brave. She was recognizing that a relationship no longer aligned with the life that she wanted, and she was trying to step away. There is nothing reckless about that. Nothing naive, nothing provocative. It is an act of self-respect. Karen did not cause what happened to her. She did not miss the signs in a way that makes her responsible. She did not invite violence by wanting something better for herself. The responsibility belongs solely to the person who chose to harm her. In telling Karen's story, our obligation is not just to explain how she died, but to honor how she lived, to remember her as a whole person, not a lesson, not a warning label, not a statistic. This tribute is not the end of that remembrance, it's the beginning. In our final episode, we'll return to Karen one last time, not through evidence or arguments, but through legacy, through what her story teaches us about listening, believing, and protecting people when they say they need space to be safe. Karen Pannell deserved more time, and she deserved to be remembered for far more than the violence that took her life. We need to stop pretending that leaving an abusive relationship is simple. It isn't. For decades, survivors have been told some version of just leave, as if Walking away is a single decision, rather than a dangerous process that unfolds under constant threat. Research and advocacy work and lived experience all say the same thing. Leaving is often the most dangerous moment, not the safest one. That doesn't mean leaving isn't worth doing. It means it needs to be done carefully and with support. If you or someone that you know is in immediate danger, the priority is survival. In the United States, that means calling 911 right away. But many situations fall into a quieter category where danger is real, but not yet explosive. That's where planning matters. Advocates stress that leaving should be treated like a high-risk event, not an impulsive move. For many survivors, the safest first step isn't packing a bag, it's talking to someone who understands the risks. Confidential hotlines exist for exactly this reason. They don't pressure people to leave, they help assess danger, plan timing, and identify options that fit the reality of the situation. In the U.S., the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 by phone, chat, or by text. Trained advocates can help with safety planning, local referrals, and legal information. For Native American and Alaskan Native survivors, the Strong Hearts Native Helpline offers culturally specific support. The National Center for Victims of Crime also provides a broader victim support services, including domestic and dating violence. One of the most important tools advocates emphasize is a personalized safety plan. A safety plan isn't a checklist that you download and forget. It's a living strategy built around your specific risks. It may include planning how to leave during a low-risk window, identifying safe places to go, setting up code words with trusted people, and deciding how to protect children, pets, and yourself during and after separation. Safety planning also means thinking beyond the moment of leaving. Many survivors face increased stalking, digital monitoring, or legal harassment after separation. Advocates now routinely include digital safety, changing passwords, disabling location sharing, checking devices for tracking as part of exit planning. Legal protections like protective orders can help, but they work best when paired with practical safety steps and local support. Another reality advocates are clear about: you do not have to do this alone. Local domestic violence programs and shelters don't just offer emergency housing. They help with planning, legal navigation, financial steps, and long-term safety. Many people never stay in a shelter, but still benefit from the guidance that these programs provide. The most important message survivors hear from advocates is this: you are not weak for staying while you plan. You are not wrong for being afraid, and you are not responsible for the violence used against you. Leaving safely is not about bravery alone. It's about preparation, timing, and support. If you're listening to this and recognize pieces of your own life in Karen's story or in this conversation, know this: help exists. Confidentially, without judgment, and reaching out for it can be the first step towards safety, not because leaving is easy, but because your life is worth protecting. And that brings us to the end of this episode and the end of the first half of Karen Pannell's story. What we've walked through isn't just an investigation, it's a reality that plays out far too often when someone tries to step away from control and reclaim their life. Karen didn't disappear. She didn't leave behind a mystery for the sake of intrigue. She was trying to create distance, and that moment became the most dangerous one of all. In our next and final episode of this arc, we'll step into the courtroom. We'll follow how the evidence dismantled the staging, how testimony reshaped the narrative, and how the truth ultimately held when the lies could not.
And before we leave this episode, we want to be clear about something important. Listening to these stories matters, but what you do after listening matters too. The show isn't just about telling stories, it's about keeping victims visible, cases alive, and families supported.
One way that you can do that is by joining our Adoptive Victim program at www.darkdialogue.com. That program allows listeners to directly support one missing person or unsolved case through records review, research, and investigative assistance. Real work that helps cases move forward when attention fades.
You can also visit that same website, www.darkdialogue.com, to read and share our victim blog posts. Those aren't summaries. They're detailed, respective profiles designed to keep victims' names, stories, and humanity visible beyond a single episode. Sharing those posts helps families, advocates, and investigators more than you might realize.
If you'd like to support the show itself and receive members-only perks, you can do that in a few different ways. You can do it at patreon.com/darkdialoguepod, coffee.com/darkdialogue, or you can subscribe to our Substack at darkdialoguecrime.substack.com. Each of those supports research, production, and long-form investigative work and gives you access to exclusive content and updates.
We also want to hear from you. If you have kudos, questions, corrections, or critiques, you can email us directly at info@darkdialogue.com. The show is better when it's a conversation, not a broadcast.
And this one really matters. Please like, share, subscribe, leave a review, give a thumbs up, and ring the bell wherever you listen or watch. It sounds small, but it makes a massive difference. Those actions push the show into more feeds, more searches, and more recommendations, which means more people hear these stories and more victims stay visible.
If you're new here, or if you want more information from the network, be sure to check out our other shows, the Dark Dialogue Main Show and Dark Dialogue Shadow Chat Sessions.
You can find all of our many podcasts anywhere podcasts are listened to on all major platforms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to stay engaged. And thank you for helping us do more than tell stories, for helping us keep them alive and keep the dialogue alive.